Now, very commonly, a lot of people are frozen to the spot. And so you feel like you wouldn't be. You feel like you would have the wherewithal in that moment to have that self-ownership and not to self-abandon and do what you want, which is to save the fish. And you feel like you would get up and you would pop that fish back into the glass bowl and save it, even though you think you understand you would be foregoing your grades and maybe your entrance to college or any of these things that are really, really important to you. So, and even though it seems unfair, you feel like you would do that. But the reality is, no matter what way this test is conducted, in every case, people wait a lot longer than they would have thought they would to take any action. They actually do sit stably in the position they're put and obey what they are told.
On Stories of Self, we go on journeys into the lives of ourselves and others. We see how stories connect, how they diverge, and how we can create our worlds and solve our problems. This is the real-life remix of storytelling, which is so often stranger than fiction. So come and sit round the fire, chill by the ocean, or get a coffee with me, as I delve into the stories of self that make, break, and remake us. Some stories are dramatic, some are serene, some will magically mirror you, and some will be delightfully different. I'm your host, Katie Reeve Arnold, and this is Stories of Self.
Something that can really change how we relate to each other and the world around us and how we relate to ourselves is self-abandonment. And I think it's really common when people first start thinking about self-abandonment for them to think to themselves, yeah, well, that's not a problem for me. I mean, I wouldn't do that. I know who I am and I'm not going to let myself down. I'm going to be who I am, and feeling strong like that. Some people know that they have a problem with that kind of thing and they'll say, no, I'm easily led by others. I easily get badgered or pushed into things. I find it difficult to stand up for myself and what I want. Either they think they're not good enough or that they don't have the right answer compared to somebody else they assume has a better answer. They put themselves down. They don't feel like they can actually stand up and be the person who they are inside. And this happens to us through our lives, but even people who think that they wouldn't self-abandon, think that, you know, they really got this, that they know themselves, that they're standing up as who they are. And I was like this as well. I've had all different experiences of it, actually. I've had the experience of feeling like I'm not good enough and that I have to listen to everyone else. But I've also had the experience of feeling that, I know who I am and I'm standing up as that person. Only to realise that underneath, the points in the past, even before I ever knew they were happening, that actually I didn't stick with who I was. What they'd done is in those moments I pushed myself so low and so deep that actually I hadn't drawn that me back again. I hadn't drawn the fullness of myself back. And so in living my life, even though I felt like I was standing up and being who I was and that I'd worked through that, actually I was still self-abandoning at points because I was living as who I felt I needed to be for those difficult times not to come back again. And in that, I'd pushed all the elements of myself that I felt that were a bit risky for those difficult times to come back again. I'd pushed them all down, and I wasn't letting them come out. And in that, I was self-abandoning. I was abandoning those elements of myself. So self-abandoning isn't always abandoning the whole of yourself, but if you're abandoning parts of yourself, if you're abandoning elements of yourself, if you're not letting elements of yourself even be recognized as valuable, then that's still self-abandoning. And this self-abandonment, it can really erode our self-trust. You can see why, right? we're logically, you can see that we're not actually allowing ourselves to be who we are. So how can we trust ourselves to be who we are? How can we trust ourselves in future to let everything fly and let everything be in ourselves when we can't trust ourselves in the past or right now? So how do we develop that? Well, we can start to develop that by increasing our self-knowing. Like letting ourselves try things, letting ourselves try some things that you used to love as a child but you don't do anymore. Try some things that you've always wanted to do but you kind of talk yourself out of. Because oftentimes it's those push down elements of us that will bubble up with these senses of longing and wanting to do certain things or to be certain things or to go certain places. And we might be pushing that down, saying, oh yeah, but that's unrealistic. Oh yeah, that's not reasonable. Just allow yourself to be and see how that comes out. See how that can actually help you to find more joy for a start. If you do something and you like it, great. If you do something you don't like it, great. You've found something else that you don't want to do. So now you're closer to finding what you do want to do. And you've let that element of you explore. You're not always going to like the things you try, but the exploration, that little kind of bubble of excitement that you feel when you think about something, that exploring that bubble of excitement, allowing that to fly and allowing that to be, allowing that to live is a really important part of learning to be yourself wholly, not to abandon any element of yourself. And that helps us to develop that self-trust that we need. We need that self-trust so that we can have the self-confidence to go out into life as who we are. Now, if we don't have that, and the world actually kind of erodes that on us, and it doesn't really help us rebuild that self-trust, that self-confidence, that self-awareness, that kind of self-love, and move away from self-abandonment. Because when we're in a self-abandoning state, when we're in a lower state, we're actually kind of easier to manage in society. So we'll keep doing our regular things because we fear change and we fear any kind of issue. We'll actually listen to instructions from the outside rather than taking our instruction from within. When we don't have a good sense of self-awareness, self-confidence, self-knowing, and when we haven't moved away from self-abandonment. As we move away from self-abandonment, it can become more difficult to manage people as a group because they have individuality. But at the same time, it can be easier to work with people and collaborate with people when they don't self-abandon, because they'll come to you with trueness of who they are, the trueness of what they want to do, the trueness of what they think. And they'll come to you with their own perspective. So people can come up with ingenious new ideas and new ways forwards because they're letting their own selves out rather than just following a prearranged pattern or what they've seen someone else do and so have told themselves is right. So one of the things that can come out of self-abandonment is actually known as the bystander effect. And there's a really interesting kind of story in relation to this. It comes out in all different ways. There's all different ways of telling this story. But people who've experienced this kind of education through this way, they tend to remember it because it's really strong. What the bystander effect can do is it can lead to you doing things that you never would have thought you would do. It can lead to you agreeing with things that you never would have thought you would agree to, and it can lead to you letting things happen in your life that you never would have thought you would let happen. So the bystander effect can cause you to become who you are not and never want to be. And this is because what it does is it encourages you to abandon yourself in favour of belonging to a group. Now, this is a really, really deep desire to belong to a group. And it's a deep desire because as children, we couldn't actually do everything for ourselves. So we needed to belong in order to be supported through those years that we couldn't do everything for ourselves. So we've still got that deep desire kind of lurking within us. And if we don't learn to go with who we truly are, to not self-abandon, then we can very easily choose self-abandonment and belonging over reflecting who we truly are, being who we truly are, and rejecting the belonging in favor of being ourselves and being true to ourselves. Now, one of the ways I've heard this told is a class of students where the normally nice teacher, when all the students go in, is actually really horrible to them one day. So all the desks are suddenly separate and arranged so that they're not close to each other, and they're individual tables and chairs. And then as the students walk in, they're silenced by the teacher immediately. They're not greeted by the teacher. They're just told to sit down. They're just told to shut up. They're just told that if they don't do this, there'll be serious ramifications. And so very quickly, the students start to obey these things. And then this is regardless of age. So actually this will kind of happen regardless of age, because it's that kind of level of shock and dominance of someone else. And you're in a structure, in a school, where you're still as a child, you still feel like you need to belong. But this can actually happen to adults too, because they have things in their life they can fear losing or they can fear happening to them as well. And so they end up sitting and doing what they're told, being quiet at their individual desk, waiting to be told what to do next. So then what they're told to do next is that if they move at all, they will be failing that class, no matter what they've done up till now, no matter what their results were, their grades results were, no matter what their work was up until now. If they move at all, they'll be failing. If they speak at all, they'll be failing. They just have to sit still, and otherwise they're going to fail. And then the teacher will there's a goldfish bowl at the front of the class, and the teacher will get the goldfish out the bowl and put it on the table next to the bowl and walk off out of the classroom, leaving all the students there. Now, very commonly, a lot of people are frozen to the spot. And so you feel like you wouldn't be. You feel like you would have the wherewithal in that moment to have that self-ownership and not to self-abandon and do what you want, which is to save the fish. And you feel like you would get up and you would pop that fish back into the glass bowl and save it, even though you think you understand you would be foregoing your grades and maybe your entrance to college or any of these things that are really, really important to you. So, and even though it seems unfair, you feel like you would do that. But the reality is, no matter what way this test is conducted, in every case, people wait a lot longer than they would have thought they would to take any action. They actually do sit stably in the position they're put and obey what they are told, against what their true self is telling them, which is that they want to save the fish, or they want to do whatever they need to in that scenario to stay true to themselves and their own values and preserve life. Yeah. So it's very difficult for people to recognize that actually they don't suddenly transform into a superhero. They don't suddenly transform into this person who, and maybe that's why we like superheroes so much, this person who, no matter what is done to them, they have this singular focus to honor their own selves, to not self-abandon, and to honor the preservation of life, and to not allow that life to be lost. And so usually, eventually, somebody may break that. But the majority, and get up and help the fish, yeah? But the majority of people will just be sitting there. It takes one person to actually break that. It takes one person to actually be the one that stands up and says, you know what, if this is the way it will be, this is the way it will be. And so actually to self-honor and have that self-confidence, you have to know yourself. So it sounds silly, like, to turn around and say to you that spend one afternoon a week doing whatever you want to do. Spend a couple of hours on a weekend morning doing something that you feel within you, that child heart, entertaining that child. If you used to love drawing, draw. If you've always wanted to fly a kite, fly a kite. If it's summer and you'd like an ice cream, get the one that you really want, not the one that you think you should want as the adult you are. Yeah? So all of these things can support us to just expand and know ourselves and entertain ourselves. And so we can end up with that self-confidence, that self-knowing, that self-awareness, that self-love that actually reduces that sense of self-abandonment and builds that self-trust. And that's the kind of thing that in that situation, those kinds of situations we're looking for. It's very, very, very painful to abandon yourself. And the more one self-abandons, the less one wants to see that that's what they've done. Because it's incredibly painful. No matter what anybody else does to you, the person who can actually cause you the most pain is yourself. And so once you've abandoned yourself, it feels like nobody can fix that. And it's true. Nobody can fix that. But you can. And so you can work through that kind of development of self-trust and that reduction in self-abandonment right through to the fact where you actually have that self-love again and that trust of yourself and you're not self-abandoning. Can you also see how not self-abandoning is incredibly important in society? We have a real problem in society with self-abandonment in order to belong. And this is very much also part of mob mentalities. So when people act together as a group in a way that they wouldn't act individually. You can see in relation to the fish, which is flapping around on the desk and wants to go back in the water, can't breathe, that the whole class is acting on what they were told. It takes one person to break that in order for any change to happen. And so this one person has to go first. They have to take on the risk. They have to have that self-trust that they're going to make sure everything's okay, no matter what happens out of this. And so this idea of actually stepping first is a huge one. Usually we look around us looking for people who've done something we've done before us all the time. I was a scientist. I am a scientist. I've been a scientist for so many years. And the thing is that in that, you look, one of the first things you do when you come up with an idea or concept, when you notice some trends, is you look for something that's been done before you. You look for a precedence. And it's actually once you find a relationship between what you're seeing and what you're intending to investigate and something that's gone before you, it's actually easier to obtain funding for that kind of thing because you have a precedence for it. Yeah? And at the end of all our scientific reports, we always write and indicate what kinds of future studies these findings and this report could generate, because we're setting a precedence for them. And we know that that's important. So it's actually really, really important to be able to, in some instances, go first without a precedence. And knowing how to go forward and to go first without a precedence and where that information comes from, we'll talk about in a future episode of Stories of Self. But have a look around you and see if you can entertain that inner you, see if you can let whatever those true colours are that you hold, if you can let those fly at some point in your week, even just for a few minutes or a few hours, and see how you feel about it. Even if you don't enjoy the thing you try, or you don't love the thing you tried, maybe you'll love the fact you tried it. And to be able to not self-abandon, to be able to self-honour is a really important part of overcoming being a bystander. Nobody wants to be a bystander in their own life. You're the star of your own show, but recognise we all are. Yeah? So take centre stage in your own life. Don't be a bystander.
We are all telling our stories, and we are all telling ourselves stories about it all. Are you brave enough to walk with me into hearing, considering and understanding the stories we tell? Join me next time, where we'll be considering more stories and illusions and stepping into creating the freedom we desire. Every moment, we are who we are choosing to be. You choose. Choose you. Because your story matters.